Hello everybody, welcome to the CreatorSpace Online Intro to Documentary Editing session. Really excited to be able to bring this to everyone. Just want to thank everyone for joining us. My name is Tom Strnad. I'm the lead digital artist of this CreatorSpace project. And again, this will be an informative session on continuing our exploration of video editing and really the kind of specifics as they relate to documentary film editing and what does that really mean and how does that work. So just want to thank all our partners in this project. So we have the Canada Council for the Arts, we have our library partners, Blue Mountains Public Library, Collingwood Public Library, Wasaga Beach Public Library. Just want to mention too that we do have the access to our digital arts computers that are available throughout those library partners. So we have the Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve Studio software that's available at each of these libraries on the iMac computers. Now the iMac computers, they've been optimized for video editing. So that means that we have the ability to do video editing. We have a lot of RAM, so that's the random access memory that lets you really have easy loading footage and playing and so on. So they've been optimized for video editing. The Blue Mountains Public Library, we also have one that's designed to do color grading and a really specific full gamut of video production and editing that you can do on those computers. So I want to let you know that you can access this footage for free, Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve, but you can also access it through our library partners on these computer systems. So it's there, you just need a library membership and just come out and use them when the libraries are open. And we really encourage you to do so. Now, the other thing is what we want to always look at is having an external drive. So what we've done is, for the most part, we've localized it so that where the directory is, it's looking for this external drive, and that's where it's loading the footage or data, your project data. We do have some sessions available on that too. So if you go to tbmcs.ca, you'll be able to access our YouTube channel, and we have some whole data management session that we're actually just going to be uploading, but it was a January session that we did. So a whole data management concept, workflow, and so stay tuned for more of those. You can reflect on those and get an idea of what we can do with project management, data management. So that's really exciting. So I hope you can access some of the software, the computers, and you can bring your own external drive. And that's really important when you're video editing. Really encourage you to get some sort of an external hard drive of your own where you can keep your footage. You can then load it onto, you can offload it onto a computer, one of the local computers there, your own computer, work back and forth. But the key is to keep saving that project to make sure that you can take it. And that's a .drp, DaVinci Resolve project. You can just export it, put it on any kind of a small drive even, reopen it, relink the media, and you have everything rebuilt again, just like what you did if you worked at the library. If you have an external drive, you can just keep bringing it there and working on the project, and that's really convenient too. External drives can be really handy. I'll put a whole documentary on like a 4 terabyte or 2 terabyte drive, and then I can just keep working on that. And that lets me, continue the ability to access the media, build the media. Then you might find yourself, if it's a larger project, you might have a couple of these, and that's okay. We can have a few hookups into the computers as well. So, it's a really convenient process. Okay, so documentary film editing. Let's go over what we're going to talk about today. The basic elements of documentary film. What are those? The documentary editing process, interviews and telling a story, structure. We got the intro, the hook, beginning, middle, the end. I call it the splash. We're going to look at exploring tempo for factual storytelling, editing words, authentic voices versus Frankenclip, sound design for documentary film, music and sound effects. What does that all mean? What are these kind of elements of a good documentary? That's what we want to look at today. So the basic elements of a documentary film. Now this is different. If you joined us last week with the narrative film editing workshop, this is quite different. So here we have the elements are a little bit different than the factual, because now our characters are more so the documentary subjects, the interview subjects. So these are the main elements. We have our interviews, which are our key subjects, supporting subjects. Just like you'd have your lead characters and supporting characters in a narrative film, you have the key subjects and supporting subjects. Then we have things called insert shots, and these are also known as B-roll, and the interviews will be called A-roll, A-roll, B-roll. Insert shots help us visually explain what's being talked about in the interview or what the documentary is about. So imagine if someone's talking about their favorite taco, you want to have a shot of that favorite taco. Otherwise, you can leave it to the viewer's imagination, but it's much more visually interesting to see that insert shot of their favorite taco. Then we have things like source and archive material. So this could be, materials from the subjects themselves, so their own photos, their own videos, home photos. Then there could be archival materials, so stock footage. So archival materials from news, from archives, like actual archives. There's the Library Archives of Canada. We have archives in each city, archives in each town and museum. Everyone has some sort of an archive within their area and around the world. You could be accessing archives as well. So that's for that kind of stock footage. Historical archives. If you're talking about the village of Clarksburg and what used to happen there with produce and farming, you'd want to access, archival materials, photos, maybe potentially some old film to add to that documentary. So that kind of archival element is really cool. So then we got a dramatization scene. So this is also something that is more and more popular, and we see this a lot in documentaries. In kind of the theatrical drive for documentaries is the idea of the dramatization, recreations of events. This could be with actors or the interview subjects themselves. A lot of true crime type series, they'll do a lot of that, where you bring in recreate scenes, recreate the murder, that kind of idea. So that dramatization of elements. Now also, if you're doing a historical documentary, how can you show the past? Maybe it wasn't filmed, maybe film didn't exist. So if you're going way back, dramatizing can be really interesting and really effective in telling the story. And so then we get back into that, you can refer back to the narrative editing in terms of how you would edit that. So that goes back into that narrative element. And then finally, animation and graphics. So there's a lot of sometimes a need for animation, showing timelines, dates, and then graphics. Really, in a narrative, we're not typically identifying this is Jane Doe, but in a documentary, you're identifying Jane Doe, director of communications for Alberta Oil Works. Fine, right? So you want that lower thirds, and then so on. So that's, those graphics are really important, visual aids for storytelling. So that's those are those elements. So if you look at this, we basically have 5 potential elements, and you'd usually have at least the interviews and insert shots and the graphics. So those 3 you'd really find in every kind of documentary. Now, again, these are just best practices, not necessarily even rules, but just best practices of what would consist in your edit. Okay, so again, A roll equals interviews, B roll equals everything else. So that's just a quick recap of those 2 elements there. Okay, so let's see this in action. I'm just going to switch over here to the DaVinci Resolve software. Sorry, let me just get out of this. Okay, so I can actually go over these elements right here. This is what we're gonna do. So import original footage, A roll, B roll. Then you organize the footage by days or interview subjects. You review these interviews. This could be done by logging yourself or getting it transcribed. There's even software that can transcribe, or typing it out. It depends how much length of materials you have. If you are doing it, if there's a person doing it versus AI doing it, you will have a more accurate transcription. So there's still a great need and a great option to really include if you transcribe it yourself. And I encourage this. It's a great process. If you don't mind doing it and you're a fast typer, if you transcribe it as an editor, you will be so familiar with the footage. So I do 2 things. I will do it that way, but I also like kind of transcribing within the editing sequence. So I can put little pieces, and I can put kind of the best of each interview, and then I can say, okay, I like this part, this part, this part, and then I start to get kind of a little library, and I get familiar with it. So the more you can become familiar with it as an editor, that's your ultimate goal as an editor for documentary film, is how familiar can you be with the story, the responses. And the more you know the footage, just beyond just what could be on paper, because sometimes there's a tendency to, let's get it transcribed, get it out there, then you're searching for words. That could be one method for something that's very long. But the more you, as an editor, can become familiar with the footage, you start to live and breathe all the comments, all the ideas. And that really helps the art of the editing, transcend what could be just the ordinary into something a little bit more extraordinary, because you start to live and breathe that interview subject's voice, their words, their statements, and you become very intimate and familiar with it so that you can use the appropriate elements when you want to tell different things in the story. So that's really my advice there. And then what we do is, we have that outline, and I like to just kind of assemble maybe roughly what's there. And then I start adding with the A-roll. So that's the interviews. I like to create that as the structure. Add the A-roll, the interviews, you know what your structure is, then you can start adding B-roll on top. Then you can add music, then you add text, titles, graphics, and the B-roll would be your insert shots, and it could be stock and archival, and also any dramatizations. That would be kind of that special additional stuff. And you can see this layering process. If you start with the interviews, and then, so it's called clip and cover. So we're clipping in the interviews, covering it with B-roll, then we can add music, add text, titles, graphics, and it would work that way. And again, this is very different from the narrative idea because we're just putting in, you're really just editing. You're not covering necessarily. You're putting reaction shots and you're dramatizing. So it's very different. But here you're creating the structure usually through your interviews or voiceover narration. That becomes the initial film structure. Then we can cover it with some visuals to help enhance it. And that's really interesting. Then you can add music, and then you can add those graphics, titles, and everything just keeps building and enhancing what's, what we can do in terms of the storytelling. So that would be the idea there. Okay, so let's get going a little bit. I just need to exit from here, and I'm going to open up DaVinci Resolve, and we're going to open up, get a project going, and then start with the idea of the documentary. Just getting stuff loaded and seeing how that can work and what's required to make that all work and happen. Okay. So here we go. I'm just loading Studio 17. So this is exactly what's available on our library partner computers, which is great. So this is going to just load up, and there we go. So now we have some options, and I think I even have a documentary masterclass demo. So I'm going to just load that up right there. That should have our footage. Hopefully everything's going to relink. Yeah, it looks like we're all relinking. Okay. So I'm going to go to the edit mode. Okay, and what I've done is I've brought in footage. So this would be typically kind of what you're looking at. So you have like your A-roll, and different interview takes. So, just an interview like so on, and that's always really great. And you can see here what I've done is put in bookmark notes. And it's really a simple process. So if I go, this is what we would do in terms of kind of logging and breaking things down. So you bring in your footage, then you can watch through this. And I'm going to just get some headphones on. I'm going to feed you guys the audio too, so you can hear it.
Perfect. That's awesome. Thank you.
Some colors.
Okay, so this is a masterclass in documentary production. This is an interview with a photographer that specializes in abandoned buildings and taking photos of these deserted elements.
Just wonder why there's so many things.
As an artist, what inspires you as a photographer?
So what inspires you as a photographer? There's our question. Okay, so what I can do is I can then put a note in here. So I can say, okay, let's put in okay, so I'm going to hit M for marker, and here I can say marker 1. And here, by clicking on that little marker, I can say inspiration for photographs. Done. So now I can go in here and find that. And that's the cool thing. So now I have that marker, right? So I know that that's the inspiration for taking photographs. So that's a really cool element there. Okay, so let's say that's his whole answer there. I can go in, out, and then what we can do is we can create there we go, inspiration for photographs. So here, you see right here what it's done is we've created that marker. So it takes the clips and then it subclips them. So then we're able to quickly find things. This is a great way to, log your footage and your interviews. So this is, we have maybe like an hour of an interview here. So it's not necessarily super long, but that's typically what you'd have, maybe half an hour to an hour. And if we log it this way, we can quickly get to the inspiration for photographs and we can start assembling that way and say, here's the inspiration, here's this, that, and we move on for there, right? So talks about meaning, continuing on people interpreting photos. This is great because then we can quickly find our elements and, throughout all these interviews, we don't have to then go back, right? So we have inspiration for photographs, continuing on people interpreting photographs, talks about meaning. So we have everything laid out. So it's a great way to be able to quickly, assemble what we want to put together. And then you just keep going, right? We can look at, here's another interview. Okay.
Is very,
Viewing my, each one of us has its own time. So
Right, so, different, so I'm just gonna go back here, take one.
I need right now, camera.
Shots.
I only have one body of.
So how many camera bodies does he own?
Your style of shots.
Okay, so I'm gonna go make it in here, M. What cameras do you own? Right, and we just keep adding this information and then you see that again we have that list, right? So each marker section is subclipping itself through, and I think that's a really great process to
and the lens, just two lenses.
what lenses, what bodies, right? And that's fantastic, right? So why not have that have that element that way? And I think that's and then so what we can do too here is I can create something. This is another method I just wanted to show you guys. So we can create a subclip and we can say cameras and lenses. Great. And now we have its own clip. So you can see I put what cameras do you own as a marker, and I have this just as its own subclip.
I only have one body of camera.
Right, and that's just that subclip. So you can create that. So there's multiple ways we can do markers, subclips, and subclips. We just go to under mark, and you can create subclip. It's also option B is the short quick command. So that's a really cool way to do that as well. So yes, so what else is required here is that element again. So we got our subclips, we have marking everything. So this is what I would then do through all the interview pieces. So you bring those in, and however that is. Now I have another sample here of some other footage, and I think I'll have. Let me just see if this works. If I have, yeah, okay. So here's some other like interviews. So you can see there's different types of interviews, and here's a sample of where sometimes you might use a 2-camera setup, and that's something I wanted to introduce too. So when you're editing now, you have 2 angles. So just like if you join us for the narrative concept, we have multiple angles. You choose what angle to go with. You can also do that in documentary filming, where you might be presented as an editor with 2 different camera angles, and in that case, you want to synchronize those and lay those down so you have camera angle A, camera angle B, and then you're ready to edit with both of those camera angles as well. So that's something really interesting there too. So this would be, you just mark these all, and all I'm doing in terms of when I import anything, I'm just putting people's names, and then if it's A camera, B camera, and takes. Because interviews, you won't really know necessarily what they are. So we're just saying, okay, we rolled, we got one take, then we cut, we did another take. That's all that you need to do for when you're identifying and labeling your footage. It's a little bit different than for narrative film, where you're going like scene 1, 2, scene 12, scene 20, all the different scenes based on a script. So here, you might have an outline or a treatment, but as the editor in the documentary, this is where you start to put this whole story together. And I think it's very different than the idea of, the narrative film where there's a script and you're following the script. Here, you're essentially writing the film as a documentary editor. And that's the really exciting part of documentary editing, that you are writing the film. So let's get into the cuts here. So this is, so how would I do this initial assembly? So this is what I would recommend, and here we can play this. So these are just a few highlights. So what you do then is you take your in and out points, just like what I've been doing here. So here's the interview, right? So you take, okay, what cameras do you own, in and out, like that. And then those in and out points go down into your timeline. So that is the first element, is you're just laying down the A-roll, your interview pieces into the segment to make it into a story. And you decide by watching it. So, I have elements here of like, what cameras do you own? What's the meaning behind your photos? How do people interpret your photos? You can see how the story keeps going, right? So we start with the technical. Okay, what cameras do you own? Cool, you have the different cameras. Maybe we want to start with talks about meaning. We start with the meaning. We decide on people interpreting. What's the inspiration? And then we can get into perhaps the how, the methods of that, right? So this is where we start to decide that story structure. But in the initial assembly, I'm not necessarily that worried about it because we can move things around. But we're trying to put those pieces together so we have that initial story structure. So here's, as an editor, you decide, okay, do you want to, and this might be in the treatment from the director. You might be the director too. So if you have a treatment, it might be written down where the idea is to talk about the photographs, the subject matter, the meaning behind them, and slowly get into the technical. Or maybe you might want to jump right into the technical and say, here's cameras, here's how the photographs happen. Now let's look at what the actual photographs are, right? So it's a different type of story. But what's the initial hook? So I would recommend, if just seeing something like this, here's a photographer talking about the concept of taking photos of abandoned places, and that kind of macabre type of mood and theme. That's really the hook, I think, for an audience, is to see what types of photographs are being done. Hook them in with showing some of the photographs. Here's the work, that's interesting. And then, the revelation slowly is like, he only uses a couple of cameras and a couple lenses. And that's really fast. That's interesting because, you might think, okay, photographically, there's this massive amount of technology behind this. But as an artist, he's really specific and just using a little bit of equipment and not necessarily as much as you might think there is based on the images. That's kind of that turning point, right? And then, beginning, middle, end. Think of that structure again. So if the beginning is showing the photographs, the middle is learning more about the artist, the end could be kind of the reveal in showing the process. And wow, okay, that's how he does it. That's really cool. And then kind of ending with maybe some thoughts of inspiring other artists. That's a really nice structure. So that could be our beginning, middle, and end. Just like in narrative film, we have to think about that same idea of having, the beginning, middle, and end, and making that work, right? So, that's really the fun thing in terms of how that will work. Okay, so here's an assembly that I put together. So this is just taking the first concepts. So here's assembly edit 1. So let's just take this kind of how it is here, and I'm just going to put some of these pieces together, and we're just going to watch it and kind of see what's there, and then it gives us an idea of potentially, I guess, what else we can put together. So here's the assembly. So let's give this a watch. I'm going to leave it like this so you can see the timeline, and we'll play it. Let's have a listen.
It's something they've seen before. It could be the house they were brought up, or their grandparents' place, but it's never the actual house. But something in their mind, it's resonates with their memories. So that's just to be curious about things around you. That's I learned from my parents taking photos, because they carry their camera all the time wherever they went. So sometimes they're just nothing important or nothing beautiful, but the fact that they always carry their camera around, because you never know what you find. So that's why I use it as a mantra now. Wherever I go, whenever I go out, I always carry my camera.
Beautiful.
I tend to follow a certain style of editing because I don't want to look all the same as other photographers. So I just try to bring a uniqueness to my photos. That's why a lot of people think they might be paintings, because I make them look like paintings. So that's just the style I'm interested in right now. Yeah. I wouldn't call myself a pro photographer. I'm semi-pro. I always liked photography. I was surrounded. My parents were into photography. They were always taking photos of things around them and taking shots of me as a child. So there were always cameras around, and I started taking photos when I was much younger and just kept shooting. And I'm shooting all the time. So there's no timeline where I thought I'd be pro or semi-pro. It's just a continuation of my hobby. So I still consider it as a hobby because I enjoy it. Yeah.
That's great.
What I learned about my photography, it keeps changing. It's a very living thing. Even though I look at the old photos I took before, there's always something that can change or that can improve. That's the beauty of digital photography. You can always go back to old images and enhance or try different styles. So that's an ongoing process. I never let the old photos stay the way they were. So I'm always revisiting the photos that I took.
Actually, that would be interesting.
There's no mistake in photography. There's no bad photography. You just have to be true to what you want to take photos of. Just find the passion, find the things that you want to photograph, and just stick with it. Yeah. Well, this area I live in is full of wonders, and if you drive around, there's so many things you want to shoot as a photographer. Even if you're not a photographer, a lot of things that you stop and just wonder why these beautiful things are around. So that's all you have to do, drive around, and they're all out there.
Yeah.
I only have one body of camera which I use, which is Canon 7D. I haven't tried any other camera bodies, so but that's what I need. That's the only thing I need right now. Once I become more professional, I might add more bodies. And then the lens I use 35 and the wide angle lens, just two lenses. Every time I go to the same location, I see something different. So it's never the same. And for different seasons throughout the year, same place looks different. So it's never the same.
That's great.
Obsession to me is tenacity. Repetition brings, I wouldn't say perfection, but brings out the obsession that I pursue. So, yeah. I don't tend to put literal meaning to my images. Each viewer feels their own emotion, and I tend to rely on that. So, but I see a perfect shot and I shoot it, and the rest is to the viewer's interpretation. Yeah, because every single viewer has different interpretation. So that's part of the fun, to listen to how they feel, what they see. So, yeah. Part of my obsession is coming from like I always want to try different things, and you always learn new techniques. So, yeah.
Great.
Well, I think I'm paying more attention to nature because I take photos of landscape photography. So I always try to pay attention to the surroundings, especially nature, and especially where I live in. And of course, without your family support, it's not easy to do what I do all the time. So having support from your family and pay attention to beautiful things I have around here. Yeah.
Perfect. So you can see how that works is an assembly. So we got a basic idea, right? We got kind of our beginning, inspiring, like, why he does things. We get it, and we walk our way through interpretation, style. People think it's a photograph type looking, like a painting, and his photographs start to look like paintings. So, how does he do that? Then we get into the process and the equipment, post-processing, and a little bit of advice and like kind of that artistic idea of like, you really need the support. It's, he goes out there, somewhat of the struggles of the artist, right? So we kind of leave people with some advice as well for the audience. So a rough assembly, and then we start to go, okay, what's good, what's not good, move things around a little bit and see how that is. But this is really kind of the first step of the documentary edit. It's just that simple. Just cutting it together. We pre-identify our elements like we've been doing with markers, subclips, and then we put it all together right there. And I think that's really the first step. And then what I like to do from there, so you can see I have a bit of cuts here. So then I start to get into like a rough cut and say, okay, this is, maybe what I want. And the idea is then, and what I like to do is then I can leave these pieces. You can see on the timeline, this beginning will be kind of the rough cut and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Because let's say I want to just make this like a really short, like a few minutes, a little quick artist profile. Because, this isn't going to be necessarily a 1 hour film. It just, how do I do something kind of faster, 2.5 minutes, let's say I'm looking at. And you have that kind of idea. Maybe you're trying to do 20 minutes, and that's fine. So it's a different, you probably have a little bit more interview sessions as the editor, but my goal is how do I make something like, a few minutes. Then you can see I select what I want to use here, and then I leave these as kind of the outtakes. And the beauty of it, you're never losing anything, right, in the editing process. You're just putting stuff in behind, and then you might go back to it and say, oh, I could, I remember I had something about that subject or that topic, I might want to add it back in. And that's the fun part where you start to say, okay, I'm going to have a little bit of a rough cut, and then you extract from your assembly, which is that longer cut. I think that was like 6 minutes, the whole thing, 5-6 minutes. And then from that assembly, you're extracting into a rough cut, which is just a little bit more, it's still rough, and that's why we call it rough cut, because it's still just going to be that A-roll, just the interview. Nothing too fancy, and we bring it in that kind of manner. So let's have a look at then, what do I pull out? So we saw that whole assembly. Let's give this a view now in terms of, what does the rough cut look like?
They think it's something they've seen before. It could be the house they were brought up, or their grandparents' place, but it's never the actual house, but something in their mind, it resonates with their memories. Just to be curious about things around you, that's I learned from my parents taking photos, because they carry their camera all the time, wherever they went. So sometimes they're just nothing important or nothing beautiful, but the fact that they always carry their camera around, because you never know what you find. So that's why I use it as a mantra now. Wherever I go, whenever I go out, I always carry my camera. I tend to follow a certain style of editing because I don't want to look all the same as other photographers. So I just try to bring a uniqueness to my photos. That's why a lot of people think they might be paintings because I make them look like paintings. There's no timeline where I thought I'd be pro or semi-pro. It's just a continuation of my hobby. So I still consider it as a hobby because I enjoy it. Yeah. What I learned about my photography, it keeps changing. It's a very living thing. That's the beauty of digital photography. You can always go back to old images and enhance or try different styles. So that's an ongoing process. I never let the old photos stay the way they were. So I'm always revisiting. There's no mistake in photography. There's no bad photography. You just have to be true to what you want to take photos of. Find the passion, find the things that you want to photograph and just stick with it. Yeah.
Perfect. So you can see we've taken the assembly that even had, sometimes you even hear the interviewer still talking. It's very rough, right? So this rough cut now is we're fine-tuning it, refining it. We put it into, what is the photograph, inspiration, a little bit of tech, and then some nice advice to kind of close it off. So we got the hook, what is this? This photography is really unique and interesting. So we're going to hook people in that way. We're going to learn more about the artist, and we're going to end with this kind of conclusion of, it's tough, and, find the things that inspire you and kind of giving those words of advice. So a really nice kind of beginning, middle, and end. And, it's going to be different for every type of subject. This artist profile, you can have something that's a little bit more, it could be kind of a little more controversial. You can, and different things will lead to different areas. But, you always have to find the story in the interview, because you can see right away that the interview is, it's probably about an hour of an interview. How do we find a short story? And that's your job as the editor, is to find something that's those gems, and find those little elements and those gems within all of your footage into the story. So again, we bring stuff in, watch it all. You can get it transcribed, or you can just do like what I showed you is, with markers, sub-clipping, identifying the parts that you want to use, and then bringing it together in that kind of manner, right? So that's kind of there with our rough cut, okay? And then what we start to do is we start to do this fine cut. And you can see right away what I'm doing here on the timeline is now I'm bringing in this B-roll. So typically I like to just put all the A-roll on video 1, and usually the accompanying interview, audio, which will just be there. That could also be voiceover narration, so if there's a narrator involved. Then I start to put on video 2 the B-roll, and that could be on video 3, 4, and so on. And that starts to bring in the idea, and you can see, a little bit of spacing. So let's look at this with the B-roll now.
They think it's something they've seen before. It could be the house they were brought up, or their grandparents' place, but it's never the actual house, but something in their mind, resonates with their memories. Just to be curious about things around you. I learned from my parents taking photos, because they carry their camera all the time wherever they went, because you never know what you find. So that's why I use it as a mantra now. Wherever I go, whenever I go out, I always carry my camera. I tend to follow a certain style of editing because I don't want to look all the same as other photographers. So I just try to bring a uniqueness to my photos. That's why a lot of people think they might be paintings because I make them look like paintings. That's the beauty of digital photography. You can always go back to old images and enhance or try different styles. So that's an ongoing process. I never let the old photos stay the way they were. So I'm always revising. There's no timeline where I thought I'd be pro or semi-pro. It's just a continuation of my hobby. So I still consider it as a hobby because I enjoy it. Yeah, there's no mistake in photography. There's no bad photography. You just have to be true to what you want to take photos of. Find the passion, find the things that you want to photograph and just stick with it. Yeah.
Perfect. So you see how we've taken now that rough cut, we put clips, the A-roll, and we cover it with the B-roll to show the photos and also B-roll of Kita, the photographer, in action. So with his camera, getting that kind of action shots, right? And it's not hard to do. You just get a few more shots. That could be done at the same time as the interview, before, after, or going somewhere on site to film as well, capturing that process. So we're putting that A-roll, interview, B-roll on top, right? And you can see how it's coming together now. We got the story, we're seeing the photographs, it's hooking us in, it's ending with that kind of, this kind of solitary image. And we're trying to reflect the artistry too, like with the artist, and you're kind of in this cold, all alone. It's tough. And that's what he's talking about, that it's tough doing what he does. It's tough as an artist in general too, like, finding things, your subject matter. Sometimes it could be very lonely, especially in photography. Getting these subjects and getting that kind of perfect shot can be hard and a struggle. So we show that visually. So we're trying to find images that reflect what he's talking about. So we want to, have complementary images in the B-roll that reflect what he's talking about. So if he's talking about my photos, you don't cut to him eating lunch, right? Like that, you have to have it has to all make sense and enhance the whole storytelling process. He talks about, the camera and using the camera. We show him using the camera. Now, we could even have something more, like maybe, he talks about his parents and the camera was always present. So maybe, if there were some photos available of that, is great, because then we can show, maybe the family with the camera and that kind of process. So maybe that's available too. So think about maybe what you can even ask your subject to try to get as an editor. You might be able to ask for some more footage. Okay, so now we take us into, that's what I'd call fine cut 1, right? Where we've gone through the process and, and we've put the photos. And now what I like to do is, if photos as an editor, we can use things in this transform tool by using keyframes in Resolve, that we can make these photos zoom in slightly. So watch what we do here. This is fine cut 2, and it just same as footage, the B-roll, but now I'm going to put a little bit of movement into those photos, so they're not just still. So check this out.
They think it's something they've seen before. It could be the house they were brought up, or their grandparents' place. But it's never the actual house, but something in their mind, it resonates with their memories. Just to be curious about things around you. That's I learned from my parents taking photos, because they carry their camera all the time wherever they went. Because you never know what you find. So that's why I use it as a mantra now. Wherever I go, whenever I go out, I always carry my camera. I tend to follow a certain style of editing because I don't want to look all the same as other photographers. So I just try to bring a uniqueness to my photos. That's why a lot of people think they might be paintings, because I make them look like paintings. That's the beauty of digital photography. You can always go back to old images and enhance or try different styles. So that's an ongoing process. I never let the old photos stay the way they were. So I'm always revisiting. There's no timeline where I thought I'd be pro or semi-pro. It's just a continuation of my hobby. So I still consider it as a hobby because I enjoy it. Yeah, there's no mistake in photography. There's no bad photography. You just have to be true to what you want to take photos of. Find the passion, find the things that you want to photograph and just stick with it. Yeah.
Perfect. So you can see how different that is now. We have those zooms and just keyframes. So I do a start and an end point, and then just say, okay, it goes from 100% to 120%, and then you can have them panning up, down, different things like that. But a little bit of movement, how great that is. It enhances something that's totally still. Had some questions coming in. So in terms of the B-roll, when he's doing photos, you can also keep the sync sound. So keep the recorded sound from the cameras, from that footage, and keep it there as well. You might want to use that, so that could be important. I think in this case they're just talking over it, so I just discarded it totally. There's people talking through it, but if you just have that shot, the sound of the camera and so on. But if you don't have good sync sound, so keep it in. You might want to use it. Sometimes outdoors can be very windy. You might just totally drop it. So kind of in that sound design area, I would then recommend recreating these sounds as much as possible too. So you can put in your own ambience, you can put in your own kind of wind, exterior sounds, shutter clicks. You can recreate all of that, or you can use some of that existing B-roll. So it's good practice to keep the B-roll. In this case, the B-roll sound. In this case, it wasn't usable, so I just discarded it right away. But you definitely should keep it if it is usable. So just make that observation. If he's outside taking pictures, keep that B-roll is not a problem at all. But that brings us into the next section, which is once I get into the fine cut, I start to do a little bit of sound. So I put a little bit of music. You can see there's gaps. So let's have a look at then. Here's kind of what the final was. And then again, we can put some titles. So I would get into that as well. So we can, if we want, we can just go to like titles, and we can put like a little title through the title tool. Where is it going? Right. So we can easily put a little title in here. So I'm gonna just put like that, for example, and then I can just have a little bit of a fade in, fade out. So now we have some music. So let's have a look at how this works in terms of kind of a final picture with some music, and maybe have some of these title elements here. So I'm just going to take this, I'm going to copy and maybe paste this. So it goes like that. Okay, so let's have a look now with So the sound design is really something, that last part that you'd want to be able to end as well, add, because shutter clicks, music, all of that is really kind of the finale of your documentary editing as you get it ready to show people.
They think it's something they've seen before. It could be the house they were brought up, or their grandparents' place. But it's never the actual house, but something in their mind resonates with their memories. Just to be curious about things around you, that's I learned from my parents taking photos, because they carry their camera all the time, wherever they went. Because you never know what you find, so that's why I use it as a mantra now. Wherever I go, whenever I go out, I always carry my camera. I tend to follow a certain style of editing because I don't want to look all the same as other photographers, so I just try to bring a uniqueness to my photos. That's why a lot of people think they might be paintings, because I make them look like paintings. That's the beauty of digital photography. You can always go back to old images and enhance or try different styles. So that's an ongoing process. I never let the old photos stay the way they were. So I'm always revisiting. There's no timeline where I thought I'd be pro or semi-pro. It's just a continuation of my hobby. So I still consider it as a hobby because I enjoy it. There's no mistake in photography. There's no bad photography. You just have to be true to what you want to take photos of. Find the passion. Find the things that you want to photograph and just stick with it. Yeah.
Perfect. So you can see how we've put in those the A roll, B roll, put in some titles. On top here we can put in these titles, added just some music, and then beyond that we can enhance it with a little bit of some shutter clicks. Could be really nice. I did a bit of color grading just to make that blue photography, take it out of blue into warm, and then we kind of keep going from that. Now the other thing to identify here is the kind of the tempo. And I like there's this spot right here, and I really like how this works, is it goes kind of slow here.
There's no mistake.
And leaving that moment where he's pondering is intentional. And that's where we get into the tempo. It doesn't have to just be like bang, 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 bang. It can be, that could be your tempo, but I like to have this like, okay, he's reflecting. So let's let him reflect for a moment. It's okay to have those pauses because we're kind of go. We have pauses where we can see the photographs, and that's the whole thing of figuring out kind of the tempo and the flow. And I kind of like this flow. It seems nice and natural. It's not too rushed, but there's moments of reflection. But then we kind of keep going too when he's talking. I don't feel like I'm bored. There's still something happening the whole time, but I get time to look at his photos. I can also experience some time just with him and let him reflect. And those are those kind of elements where you start to get into tempo. And that's that real final fine cut gravy where you can leave a little bit of beats, a little space, and always consider that. Once you put in some music, you might want to change that, and don't feel afraid that you can't keep moving things around a little bit more. And I think that's a really interesting aspect, that you can do that, and not to be afraid of doing that. So that, in summary, that's really the main thing, right? We bring stuff in, put it into, organize it, label it. Are there multiple camera angles? Then do that as well. And then start to do those markers, sub-clipping, organizing what it is. Start with an assembly, go to a rough cut. You might have a few rough cuts, go to the fine cut 2, where you start to maybe add some music or titles, and then finish it all off, right? Full sound design, you want to have that mixed. You want to be able to hear it, and so on. And that could be the picture editing. You might go into a whole further sound thing, but I like to get a temp sound done, so at least we know what it's going to be like. In documentary, a lot of times the sound might be really what you're doing in your editing as well. So that picture editing kind of goes right into sound. You might be finishing the sound in documentary films. That's often the case, or there could be some additional post sound, which is great too. So we have a lot of sessions on post-production sound. We're going to be doing some more of those upcoming. But again, you can go to our website, tbmcs.ca, go to our YouTube channel. You can access a lot of the sound design and sound editing workshops as well. So in terms of where we go, that whole idea. So just kind of a recap here. The beginning. You're introducing your key interview subjects, provide an overview of your story. What are you going to look at? So we see right away, we're going to be looking at this photography. What's the overall style, right? Like kind of graphics, photos, zooming in. We know that's the style. So that's our beginning. Middle, following through after you've had the hook in the beginning, carrying through with the story, showing more photos, showing his technical process, introducing more information, build towards the climax or ending of the film. So, here the twist is like, this is tough, like be aware of that, it's an enjoyable process, but it is tough. The end, conclude your story, provide the final statement. Again, that whole idea, like it's tough and stick to it. Wrap everything up and a memorable splash. So that's by putting that final photo, that icy photo. It makes you kind of have that lasting impression with the graphic. and you know, it's a great way to really make it all work. So again, think about the tempo, right? How, you know, making things faster, slower in length of shots. That's the tempo. Adding those pauses, like I showed, and that could be really great. You know, what kind of the tempo. Then there's the music tempo, right? So, you know, using different kind of music tempos to make things faster, slower in terms of music. So choice of different music, and working on that. So here's the one thing too. So keeping the authentic voice. So letting the people talk and not overcutting it. Because in television, reality television, there's something called a franking clip. And that's by taking all these different words and creating new sentences. That's not very authentic. So I encourage everyone, you know, doing their documentaries here, documentary editing, to let these voices just speak. We can get rid of some ums or change some pauses and things. But if we start to say things like, you know, I like ice cream, and it's cut from 3 different things. Maybe the person never said that, but that's a franking clip. I like ice cream. But maybe the person said, I like chocolate milk. But you're taking ice cream from somewhere else. Maybe he said, I hate ice cream. So you can then say, I like ice cream. And you're cutting that together. It's not authentic anymore because we're making things so that it can just work. And that's what reality television does a lot. It's what it's called a franking clip. So I really encourage everyone to keep authentic voices in their documentaries. And then again, the sound design and the music can be just as important. And you know, you want to hear what you see. So if you see waves, let's hear the waves. If you see the camera clicks, let's see that. So that's what I would add into here still, is having some of those shutter clicks and working on that. There can also be too much music. So think about different songs, trying different songs. You can sample a lot of the music, you know, so there's like all the little stock, all the variety of stock music libraries out there that you have to pay some fees for. There's some free ones, but the ones where you purchase from, you can usually download a preview song that has some sort of like a audio soundbite on it that is, you know, the word mark, if you will, and try them out. So audition, and then you can buy your music and try, you know, working with those different tempos and working in that manner. So in terms of this session, again, I want to thank all our partners on this project. So Canada Council for the Arts, we have our library partners, Blue Mountains Public Library, Collingwood Public Library, Wasaga Beach Public Library. You can access the iMac computers with DaVinci Resolve right on at these library partners. Go in, you can edit. In terms of, again, finding music, try it out, you know, choose it, and I encourage you to check out some of our other sound workshops, and we'll have some more upcoming ones as well. This same link, you can rewatch this all after as well. So I really hope that that you'll be able to see, you know, you can rewatch this, see those kind of those parallel segments and cuts and how we've built into this final one. You can always email me, tom@tbmcs.ca. And again, thanks for joining us. And again, you'll be able to rewatch this and you know, enjoy and try some of these techniques out. And I hope to see some of your films soon. And I will catch you at the next workshop. All the best and have a great rest of the day. Take care.